sending us the in the middle of the night verse. We don't want that. We don't want about clouds.
You can take your time, but let's give them the right one, okay? Because otherwise they're going to fucking make a mistake.
Hey, you're giving us in the middle of the night instead of clouds.
That's not the one. Remember, look, I'll tell you.
Yeah, we're both doing harmony again to it.
Just wait a second, let me explain, okay?
What's the matter with you, Philip? It's the last fucking verse.
In the middle of the cloud, I called your name, Oh Yoko, and he stopped here once, remember? And that's the one you're playing now. We don't want that one. We want the one that he recorded afterwards, all new and free, that was from in the middle of cloud up to the end.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, look, the end of the song is just like the fucking rest of it. We're going to sing the harmonies to Oh Yoko. Come on. What's the matter with
What are you doing?
Aren't you hearing your voice, John?
Otherwise we'd be singing, wouldn't we? Sorry, I sang the fucking melody.
You have to sing, oh yeah, Phil, just don't be afraid, just sing into the mic.
Yeah, that's it.
Phil, you want to make sure about your sounds and then just sing very loud, okay? John, why don't you just sing it for him once?
Oh, Yoko. Oh, Yoko. Yoko. Oh, fuck you now. What's that, Nick? Oh, like, don't start changing fucking reels in the middle of a take. Here we go. Hey.
Can't get out of my bed. There's a thought crime running through my head. Can't take these rules, and people are fools who believe what they read and believe what they see. Believe what they see on the TV. Opinions are like iPhones. Everybody's got one.
Hello, welcome to episode 24 of Glass Onion on John Lennon. So here we are, 6th of December, coming up to the old Christmas. And today we're back to the normal programming. Hope you enjoyed the bonus episodes. I had a couple of nice messages about that. Also had a message from someone saying that they were enjoying my intros. The intros have got a bit longer, as you probably noticed, as the year's gone on. Try not to make them too long, but, you know, it's a nice little chance to talk about a few things. I feel like Dick Cavett sometimes. You know, he was famous for his opening monologues. Although the joke with his was that they were famously quite bad. That's not what I'm going for at all. What you just heard there, listeners, were a few clips of John Lennon getting angry in the studio. Was actually, I kind of put them together. One was a famous clip of them recording Oh Yoko, which is something we referenced later in the talk today. I kind of put the clips together because I put this stuff on YouTube and I can't even have any snippets of music. So there were sort of snippets of Oh Yoko in between the clips. So it wasn't quite as much of a diatribe as it might have sounded there, like a constant getting on the back of the sound engineer there. I'll put a link to the video anyway, it's quite entertaining. And then the clip you heard at the very end of him also getting angry was quite hilariously, really, during the recording of a very delicate song called Oh My Love. We talk about that later as well, how he can switch from this delicate song to suddenly snapping at, again, somebody in the studio with him. I actually put those clips in partly for their entertainment value, but also to show that, you know, that was filmed and they didn't sort of destroy the film of John Lennon not looking cool and calm and collected. You know, they were pretty honest and they kept that, and we get to that as well anyway. Doing my usual thing of spoiling lots of stuff that we talk about, but anyway. So today, as promised, this is a podcast about the Imagine film from 1972. If you listen to the last episode at the end, I was talking about it. And it's not the Imagine film that has John Lennon's narration going through it. It was a posthumous one, 1988 that was. What you'll actually find, myself and my guest, who is Scott Phipps, who's got 3 podcasts of his own, which I think we talk about in the intro, Real Britannia, Rainbow Valley and Stinking Paws. He likes his puns, obviously does Scott, as I do. So Real Britannia, R-E-E-L, and Stinking Paws, P-A-U-S-E. One thing I need to tell you is that the original plan, when we recorded this, which was about a month ago, I think, we were going to try and do the 72 film and the 88 film in one go. But, you know how things go. We had a really nice chat. It was very enjoyable, this one. and we only got to the end of the 72 film. We're going to edit out the bits where we say, we're going to talk about the 88 film later, but couldn't be bothered, frankly. Life's too short. So just to tell you that we will be getting together at some point, probably in January, to do a review of the 1988 film, as the original intention was. So we'll get to that. So basically, we talk about Scott's podcast at the beginning. We talk about British films in general, which is the theme of one of his podcasts, and Scott sort of tells his origin story, which I do with a lot of my guests, or all my guests. When did you first get interested in John Lennon? And as you'll hear, Scott's story about that's very poignant. And then we get to talking about the Imagine film, and we basically just go through the videos one by one. As I said, I love talking to Scott. He's a bit of a seasoned podcaster, and it was very easy to edit as well. So thank you for that, Scott. And we just found ourselves really enjoying this film and the kind of goofiness of it. And as you'll hear, I won't tell you now, but we sort of find a conclusion about how seriously we think John and Yoko actually took themselves. You can make your own judgment about that. Obviously, I would recommend watching the film. I mean, you could watch one of the videos and then listen to us talking about it, whichever way you want to do it. But the original film is on YouTube. I think I mentioned it, but I say that it's in a few parts. But I think someone's actually put the full film on in one video. I'll put a link to that if I find that that's the case. So without further ado, here is myself and Scott Phipps talking about Imagine 1972. And I'll be back at the end with a few words. Enjoy. Hi Scott, how are you?
Hey, how are you? I'm very well, Anthony. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Well, thanks for coming on, yeah. I'll tell the listeners actually how I heard of you. It was originally from a podcast called Rainbow Valley, which is one of 3 that you've got. I'll get you to talk about them all in a minute. Rainbow Valley is about the 60s, and you obviously spent a long time researching them because you've got lots of detail in there, and you did a couple of Beatles ones, which is how I actually heard of you. You did one about Brian Epstein.
Yes.
And one about Sgt. Pepper. And then I saw that you had a podcast about British films called Real Britannia, Real, R-E-E-L. And so I started listening to that again. So can you tell us how you started with podcasting and tell us a bit more about those 2 and the other one you've got?
Yeah, well, it all started with the other one, which was Stinking Paws, P-A-U-S-E. That's a reference to any Planet of the Apes fans out there will probably get it. But I'd always wanted to do something specifically on the 60s. I wanted to do a documentary format rather than 2 people talking or 3 people in the studio having a chat. And it was a bit of a passion project. And when I originally set out, there was at least 3 things that I wanted to cover. One was the Brian Epstein story. The other was the Great Train Robbery. And the third was the Profumo affair. And I wanted to get it right. So the first one I did as a bit of an experiment was Janis Joplin. And I was quite pleased with that, So I thought, I'll take a gamble on the Profumo affair and become a bit more brave with special effects and music and even putting on voices for some of the reenactments that I do as well. And it then led to the Epstein one. What I try to do is I'll think of what subjects I want to cover, but then I'll take it from a slightly different angle. So everybody knows the Beatles story, but perhaps not so familiar with Brian Epstein. So I sort of told the Beatles story from Epstein's point of view. Similarly with when I did the JFK one. If I was to go down the conspiracy route, it would be a 17-hour podcast if you were to take into, everything that everybody's ever thought about the whole thing. So I took it from the point of view of Abraham Zapruder, who was the guy that filmed that 26 seconds of footage, quite famous home movie. So that's more of a passion project. And as you say, the research, it takes me months to actually get things done with that one because I'll go and buy every single biography. I'll get access to whatever I can. Because I like to see different points of view and different people's feedback on whatever story I'm telling. And then cherry pick it into something, hopefully, that makes a bit of sense. The Great Train Robbery one was 2 and a bit hours long. The Brian Epstein one I split up, similar to your show. I split into 2 parts because I had a definite sort of cut-off point where they toured the Far East, where the Beatles went to Manila. And I thought I'm going to cut it off there because I've told his story from childhood. So I need to sort of have a cut-off somewhere. So that was Rainbow Valley, and Real Britannia is literally what it says on the tin. It is British movies, but it's going right back to old British Alfred Hitchcock's Carry On films, the Ealing comedies, Powell and Pressburger, whatever it is. If it's a British movie, the most recent one we did was 2015, Legend, The Craze Story with Tom Hardy. And we have a lot of fun doing that. That's my Sunday morning recording, Real Britannia, similar to what we're doing today.
And there are a couple of favourites. Can you give us a couple of favourite British films on that one?
Oh, we had a lot of fun with possibly the last one we actually did, which was our Halloween one. We had a special guest from another podcast, Mark, and for some reason we chose the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And my argument at the beginning was, is it a Halloween movie and is it British? And straight away the boys replied, yes, it is, for both those counts. Totally enjoyed that. We're having a lot of fun working through the Carry On movies chronologically, the Norman Wisdoms, and we're going to eventually do all the James Bonds. You know, we've only done Dr. No so far, but it's a work in progress. It will go on for years. There's so many great British movies out there, and it's sort of rediscovering a lot of the stuff that we watched. One of the favourite things we always say on the show, it just reminds you of those cold, wet Sunday afternoons where BBC would show one of these old classic movies as a Sunday matinee. And that's the sort of stuff we try and pick, you know. So, yeah, lots of memories built around it as well.
Well, what happened with me, actually, I've been abroad for 15 years. I was in Thailand, I was in Italy and Spain. The reason is that I'm a teacher of English as a foreign language. Well, I was anyway. Yeah. Still do a bit on Skype. And I actually came back to Britain just in July to live. And it was funny that I've kind of rediscovered some Britishness because I've been that long away. So it was a bit of serendipity that I found that you had this real Britannia, and I love it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, sorry, have you got any favourite sort of genre of British movie? Have you got any particular favourites? Because we take the mickey out of the Carry-Ons and they have dated so badly. But when we rewatch them, we're just having such a great laugh. You know, we don't care what political correctness means nowadays. You know, we just remember watching them as a kid. And Norman Wisdoms, you know, they're kids' films at the end of the day, but they're still funny, you know.
Yeah. I think the Carry-Ons are very clever. And I can't watch them anymore without thinking about this documentary I saw called Carry On Darkly.
Oh, saw that, yeah.
Have you seen that on YouTube?
Yeah.
Just the extraordinary characters, as in the people. Sid James, Kenneth Williams, Charles Hawtrey, Frankie Howard.
All troubled.
Yeah, all very troubled, yeah. I actually put a request on your show, and I think you're going to do it, that a film that probably I'm about the only person who's ever heard of this film, called A Prize of Arms.
I've started watching it.
Yeah.
Stanley Baker.
So, I don't know. I listened to this podcast called Classic Film Jerks. I don't know if you ever come across it.
Do you know what? I think I do. There's a couple. Yeah. Yes, I do.
Yeah, there's a couple of Canadian guys. And they, I get annoyed if podcasts get too silly. Like, I like it to be light and everything, but when it's too, like, just taking the piss only. Yeah. And they were a bit like that when I first started listening to them. And then they've kind of changed a little bit. But they kind of talk about old films, about whether they're classics or not. And they do make fun of them. And there's certain traits which are funny about old films.
Right.
Just the things like, silly things like love scenes, where they just sort of clamp their lips together, don't they? And have this very weird embrace. I just talked about this on my last podcast, so I can't go on again. I had my mum on the podcast.
Oh, right.
Yeah, which was great. We talked about I called it the other 1960s, which is normal life in the 60s. And we talked about the kitchen sink. I think the kitchen sink films, to answer your question, they're big favourites. The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. Yeah. The one with Albert Finney.
Saturday Night, Sunday Morning.
Saturday Night, Sunday Morning. And we had a bit of a sort of binge of those. I watched A Taste of Honey.
Oh, I love that film.
Yeah, you like that, yeah. Well, to answer your question, they could be my favourites, actually, the genre anyway.
Well, what we're doing on Real Britannia, I've started doing a kitchen sink season, doing them chronologically. Most people generally agree there's 10 classic kitchen sink movies, starting from like Room at the Top, going up to past sort of like Taste of Honey. You know, I think it finishes at Billy Liar, I think, is the cut-off point. But my argument is there's a lot of films that influenced the kitchen sink genre in the run-up to it. Films like Pool of London, It Always Rains on Sunday. A couple of these Stanley Baker ones. Violent Playground is coming up very soon. So we're doing like a precursor to the influences on the kitchen sink before we hit Room at the Top and The L-Shaped Room and all these ones you've mentioned. But then it carries on afterwards. Like you say, Kes. Even Sunday Bloody Sunday 1971 possibly could be seen as having it's part of this social realism movement. And there's also social commentary stuff, a bit like the cop stuff, the British police procedurals, a bit like the Blue Lamp, all interlinked, you know, and there's some stuff that highlights racial tension and prejudices like Sapphire. They're all going to be mentioned. They're all going to be becoming part of this, what initially started as a 10 movie part of Real Britannia has become 28 movies in total that I'm going to cover. Things like Darling and that, and it's possibly one of my favourite parts of it as well, is actually going back and finding out that the influences stretch right back to documentaries made in 1927, leading right up to the early 70s. So, yeah, fascinating period in British film history.
Just to link this to Beatles, was Violent Playground the one that's set in Liverpool?
It is. Yeah.
But there's no Scousers in it at all.
Not at all. No.
I haven't seen that. Is it worth watching?
It's interesting. Yeah, Stanley Baker. I never really appreciated Stanley Baker apart from in Zulu for years and years. That's the only thing everybody ever knew Stanley Baker for. And Hell Drivers. I always loved Hell Drivers.
Yeah, I did as well.
Yeah.
I was pleased you did that one.
Yeah, we covered that a few months back. And there's so much more to Stanley Baker. There's some dross there, but there's some bloody good stuff as well,
Well, genuinely, you will love this Prize of Arms when you watch it, because it's very taut, T-A-U-T.
Yes.
And I love heist movies. I'll tell you what I love about heist movies. I'm a musician. I've been an actor. I even did a tiny bit of stand-up comedy. And the thing about when you pull off a crime and you've got it all planned, it's basically a performance. Right?
Yeah.
So if you go on stage as an actor, I just did amateur stuff, but I did a little bit of Shakespeare, and it's incredibly nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And in amateur stuff, when you've got stuff on a table, it's possible that something could roll off the table.
Yeah.
It's just silly things like that. You've got to either just try and brush them off or try and make them look like they're part of the performance. And in this one, Prize of Arms, which is basically where they're robbing an army barracks, when you do a crime, which I haven't done, I'm just going by films, everything has to fit together. And if anyone doesn't follow the script, either the protagonists or the people you're trying to rob, basically, if anything goes wrong, you've got to improvise and everything. And I love the idea of that as a heist, as a performance. So you will love that film. Genuinely.
Yeah, I watched the first 15, 20 minutes on the train going into work just to make sure that, the copy I had was working. And I thought, I'm going to save this until I get home. It's going to be a Friday night movie before we do the recording on that one. That's going to be my Friday night treat, because it's a Stanley Baker that I haven't seen. And as I say, the more of his stuff that I'm watching, the more I'm learning to appreciate how good an actor he actually was. And you forget he was also a major sort of film producer as well at the time. Absolutely love him. He's become one of the undiscovered gems of the Real Britannia podcast.
Yeah. All right. Just quick segue to Beatles before we get onto the topic. Are you planning to do Hard Day's Night or Help on Real Britannia?
I am, and I'm hoping to have you as a guest.
Oh, okay. Lovely. I didn't set that up, listeners.
What I was originally going to ask you to do, and again, you can do this if you want to, was How I Won the War.
Oh, yeah.
Because that fits perfectly within the sort of Real Britannia wheelhouse, that it's Richard Lester directed, but you've got Roy Kinnear and all these famous British faces in there, and then obviously the John Lennon part. So that may be something to consider, you're more...
I think Hard Day's Night is the one I'd love to do, because I've only ever seen How I Won the War once. I'll probably watch it again. I think when I was younger, the only bits I was interested in were the John Lennon bits, which is
of course, yes, you don't know what the rest of the film's like, yeah. But no, you are definitely down for Hard Day's Night, my friend. You're in.
Okay, lovely. All right. Right, something I always ask guests to give your sort of John Lennon / Beatles origin story.
Yes.
So, obviously, you grew up in England, I take it.
Yes, I did, yeah.
Obviously, it's impossible not to grow up in England, not to be aware of the Beatles, but seems like you're a pretty big fan. So, what was the origins of that?
I turned 50 this year. I'm the same age as Abbey Road. So I was one of these guys that were fortunate just to be at the tail end, even though I don't remember that, first couple of years. But throughout the 70s, same as most households in the UK, there was always a stack of vinyl. And that vinyl would have all the Beatles LPs. The red and the blue album, were always at the top of the pile because they were the greatest hits. But the turning point for me, I remember in the 70s, things like Hard Day's Night, Help and Yellow Submarine were given their premieres on BBC. Even the Shea Stadium concert was shown on BBC, like 77, 78, something like that. But the turning point for me was the summer of 1980. I'd just finished primary school. So September, that's it, all grown up now, secondary school, time to, reevaluate your life and start moving forward. But that summer in between, we used to get that 6 weeks off in the summer holidays. My uncle was and probably still is the biggest Beatles fan that I know. And even when I see him now, the conversation will always turn back to the Beatles or 60s music in general. And he was the only person I knew that had every single vinyl copy of every single Beatles album, original. So I spent that summer buying you remember C90 cassettes?
C90, yeah.
Yeah.
And there was C60 as well.
Yeah,
Wasn't it?
so I saved pocket money and bought these cheap C90 cassettes. And every weekend I would go up there and I would tape his vinyl collection, basically, throughout that summer. And he even had the Silver Beatles album, Live at the Star Club at Hamburg.
Oh, yeah. That sounds great now, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I had
I
that.
didn't like it, but I love it.
Yeah, but we had the vinyl copy of it with that awful cartoon drawing of them on the front. He had Live at the Hollywood Bowl. You know, everything. He had everything there. So I worked my way through, and I did it chronologically. So even though I was fully aware of the Beatles, I thought, no, I'm going to do this properly and see sort of the evolution weekend by weekend. So I'd got the first 2 albums on this first cassette because they were under 45 minutes long.
Yeah.
And then the following weekend I'd get the next 2 and then the next 2. So that whole summer until I got up to sort of Abbey Road, Let It Be, whatever. And that defined my last summer as a kid, basically, before I had to go to secondary school. But then, of course, the Double Fantasy album came out in November. My uncle got really excited about that first Lennon solo album for a little while. What was the one before? Was it Shaved Fish? I can't remember what the one before.
Yeah, that was a compilation. It was 75. The
yeah.
last sort of originals one he'd done was Walls and Bridges.
Walls and Bridges, yeah. And then also my uncle had the rock and roll album.
Oh, sorry, I forgot about that. But that was
that there?
well.
Yeah. So I'm more rock and roll Beatles era than later stuff. You'll probably find this out as we go along. But
Oh,
but so it's, that whole summer was spent listening to my uncle's vinyl collection and taking home these dodgy cassette copies of it. And then, of course, weeks after that, December 1980 happened and the whole world changed. And I just remember that Christmas. I came home from school and I remember it being on the news. And it just dominated that whole run up to Christmas because obviously with the album coming out, we had things like Watching the Wheels, Woman, Starting Over, which I still love, is one of my favourite solo tracks of his, Starting Over. And even to this day, that run up to Christmas from the beginning of December, as well as all the familiar things that you have like decorations, Christmas carols, shopping, all that sort of stuff, it's still John Lennon to me. There was this very weird atmosphere for that couple of weeks in the run up to Christmas. Happy Christmas War Is Over came out, Give Peace a Chance. Everything was re-released and it just dominated the TV and the airwaves over Christmas, and it just made it a very bizarre time, and that has always stuck with me. You know that thing about JFK, you know, the people say they remember where they were, they heard the news. Same with John Lennon, December the 8th, 1980. Came home from school, turned on the telly, bang, there it was. So that's my influence, you know, and since then, the following year, we mentioned briefly off air, the Philip Norman book Shout came out. So I've been listening to the music for a year, and now all of a sudden, I got the backstory. I got the story of the Quarrymen. I got the story of Epstein, which I didn't know. I got the breakup story. I got all the bits that went on in between. I got the Hamburg years. I got the Trouble in Manila, Bigger Than God, all of that, which I was vaguely aware of.
Yeah.
But Philip Norman, I think, is probably still the definitive book, you know, and I recommend it to anybody that wants a potted history of the Beatles. Well, it's not actually a potted history. It's quite an in-depth history because he uses interviews that he actually conducted himself, doesn't he, in that book, if I remember rightly.
I'll just say one thing. In the era of post-tune-in era, everything is potted.
Yeah.
In comparison. Sorry, go on, carry on. Sorry.
But it's true, yeah. And that was it. I mean, my love of the Beatles was inbred in me anyway as a small child. But that just cemented it for me, that sort of summer of 80 and 81. Then CDs came out, you know, 87, 88. They started reissuing the Beatles albums on CD. I think I bought Sgt. Pepper was the first one to come out on the, whatever it was, the 30th anniversary or the 20th anniversary would have been then.
Yeah.
And I bought that even before I had a CD player because I wanted it that badly.
Yeah.
And a few months later, as they were bringing them out month by month, chronologically after that, they went right back to the beginning. I then got my CD player and just totally rediscovered them once again in digital crystal clear quality, you know. Yeah.
And again, with these, obviously there's the anthology, but then these isolated tracks through GarageBand. I mean, for me, that was just another, you know, I thought I knew the songs, but now having isolated guitars, you can hear all these really clever guitar bits that you can't hear in the final record.
Yeah.
It's just a gift that never stops giving, as they say.
It just makes you wonder what else is out there or what they can achieve over the years with the amount of tape footage they've got, you know, audio tape footage.
Well, you know from, I'm sure you bought a few DVDs in your time.
Yes.
You know, they update them and they give you a few more special features.
Yeah, which I hate, but yeah.
Yeah, well, what I hate is that they're clearly just kind of milking it. Every anniversary of, like, some of my favourite films, Raging Bull's one of my favourites.
Yeah.
2001, Jaws, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Whenever they come out, there's always a bit more footage.
Yeah.
And, of course, with most of... I really should get onto the topic, I'm sorry. With most of these things... like I watch Planes, Trains and Automobiles, just to give a silly example.
Okay.
And I watched it this summer, first time in 10, 15 years. Absolutely loved it.
Yep.
The first cut of that was 4.5 hours.
Really?
Something like that. Or I think Groundhog Day as well. That was another kind of rewatch that I loved. That was something like 3.5 hours. And all these films, you know, these classic films, it's conceivable that there's a 3-4 hour cut kicking around.
Yeah.
And you'd probably be pleased it's not the final cut, but what I wouldn't give to watch like a 4-hour cut of like Rocky or something. If it exists.
Actually, Rocky we've just recorded for the Stinking Paws. It's our 200th movie review.
Oh, wonderful.
We went back on that and just didn't realise how great the acting was. People sort of slag off Sylvester Stallone for playing dumb, but that's what he's doing. He's playing a thick, you know, Philadelphia boxer, you know, and absolutely fascinated by it. Interestingly, that the thing we're going to be talking about today, the 88 version of Imagine, I read the original cut for that was 24 hours long.
Wow. Oh, someone find that, will you?
Yeah, and you know the original version of the 72 Imagine?
Yeah.
There was a theatrical cut and a TV cut, wasn't there? Do you know this?
Maybe not, actually.
I will tell you later on if you want when we get to it, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, do that. Yeah, that's good. I mean, my origin story, I won't tell it again, but I'll direct listeners to episode 1 where I talked about it.
Yes.
Mine was the Ray Coleman biography of John Lennon.
Which I have, yeah.
Imagine 88, which we're going to talk about later, and Complete Beatles, which I think you probably did see. And I'm recording, as we sit here, Sunday the 3rd of November. This afternoon, I'm appearing as a guest with a couple of American guys to talk about Complete Beatles. So.
Yeah, see, that's all part of that chronology that I was talking about, because that came out in 82.
Yep. It did, yeah.
VHS, one of the first videos I ever owned.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned to you again briefly off air, the thing that fascinated me, there was interviews with Billy J. Kramer and Jerry Marsden.
Yeah.
And when I watched it, it tied in visually really nicely with the stuff that I'd read in the Philip Norman book. There was footage of them in Manila. There was footage of them in Hamburg, you know, Stuart Sutcliffe. There was photos, there was, you know, pictures of Astrid and all this. It was all there. Everything was there. And it was like fascinating. And I watched that till the tape wore out pretty much.
Oh, me too, yeah, me too. Just ridiculous. And I mean, I've got a fairly good memory anyway. And I was saying to you, I watched Imagine 88 and I watched Complete Beatles for the first time in a good 20 years and just remembered pretty much all the words.
Yeah.
They were just burned into my mind. I got into the group around the same time as you. I was born in 75 and I got into them about 88. So I was about 13.
Yeah.
And I was the same. I just spent probably 2 years just full on immersion till I just drove my family mad.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, my family just like, all we ever hear from your room in the car as well. Because although I was the youngest of 3, I always took control of the tape deck in the car. I think my will. My sisters would go mad. But anyway. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 2 films today, which are both called Imagine. And there's actually 4 Imagine films to do with the project in 1971. The project was John Lennon's album Imagine, and Yoko was making an album called Fly at the same time. So they were kind of in conjunction. Obviously, the emphasis was more on the John Lennon one. So chronologically, there was a 1972 film of about an hour, which we're going to talk about in a sec, which was basically music videos of mostly John Lennon songs and a couple of Yoko songs. There was a 1988 Imagine, which we're getting to. Then in 2000, there's one called Gimme Some Truth, which I believe is on YouTube if no one's ever seen it. Gimme Some Truth and Making Him Imagine, which I absolutely loved. I thought some amazing footage. And actually, one of the criticisms of Yoko and the John Lennon estate might be that they're always bringing stuff out that makes John Lennon look good and sort of maybe kind of preserving the peacenik image, which I would argue was just sort of one of his manifestations. But anyway, we'll get to that.
Yep.
But very interesting, on the Gimme Some Truth, which I'm going to guess you've seen, there's a lot of bits that aren't flattering to John Lennon where he loses his temper. You must have seen some of that before. Yeah,
there's a very brief snippet of that in the 88 one as well. Where he loses it. And he loses it, doesn't he? Because it's the harmonies that he's trying to do with Phil Spector.
That's right.
Yeah, you get a very brief little glimpse of that in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the other one that's quite funny, he's doing "Oh My Love,"
Yeah.
Which we'll talk about. And, I mean, people probably know that song was like, oh, my love. And he's doing this lovely delicate. And then you hear this sound of like a tape reel.
Yeah.
He goes, oh, don't fucking change tape reels in the middle of a take. What the fuck are you doing? And it's just so funny to see, oh, my love. And then he goes back into it again. And there's something I talked about. I had Ken McNabb on my show. He wrote a book about the last year of the Beatles. And we were talking about this amazing ability they had to compartmentalize. So they'd have in 69, they'd have a horrible business meeting with terrible acrimony, with Klein on one side and the Eastmans on the other.
Yeah.
And then the next day they'd be in the studio and they'd just be able to turn that tap off and turn on the recording tap and just be friends.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Let It Be movie is a fascinating portrait of a band splitting up, basically.
Yeah, and of course, looking forward to the Peter Jackson next year.
That'd be great. I mean, what footage have they got there? There must be hours and hours of it, like you say.
Yeah.
Interesting little snippet as well. I mean, Hey Jude, the single release, has actually got swearing in it as well. Did you know that?
What, sorry? Say that again?
The single release of Hey Jude actually contains Paul McCartney saying fucking hell in the background.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, is it Paul? I thought
Is it Paul
John.
or John, isn't it? One says something and the other one responds with fucking hell, doesn't he? And
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And it cracks me up because Radio 2 play that every day. A 7-inch single that's got swearing in it, which nobody noticed for years.
What was I going to say? Yeah, the other one was John Lennon, John and Yoko Above a Sunny Sky, which I think came out last year or 2 years ago.
Which I haven't seen, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good. A lot of it will be familiar to you, but there's always a few interesting snippets.
Yeah.
They've got some talking heads on there. Yeah, so basically 4 Imagine projects. I find like the Imagine project itself, it's very, what's the word? It's very kind of photogenic. John and Yoko are quite photogenic. John's hair's calmed down a little bit.
Yes.
They're all in white. They're in this lovely big studio. They've got some great musicians there. So it's a very attractive thing. And of course, John Lennon, by his own admission, was very good at sort of quite simple sloganeering. So Imagine is just a very simple thing. Of course, originated with Yoko's book Grapefruit.
Yeah, which is actually sort of focused on in the documentary as well, isn't it? Because he's wearing the Grapefruit T-shirt and
that's right.
They're at a book signing as well.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so let's start with the original films. It probably would be a good idea for listeners to watch this before we talk about it.
Yeah.
Before listening to us talk about it.
Our ramblings can't do it any justice, to be honest, if you haven't seen it, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And it is available on YouTube, I think, in a few parts. So basically, I've just made a few notes on each of the songs. So I'll just start us off and then chip in whenever you want to.
Yeah, you may have to remind me sort of visually of what was going on because I watched them both together last night and they're sort of blended all into one great big long 3-hour movie to me at the moment, so I need to sort of separate it out a bit. Yeah,
sure. Okay, so the Imagine 1972 film, so they start with obviously the famous Imagine video, so they're walking up to the house, Tittenhurst Park. He's playing on the piano and she's opening the massive curtains. Now, I suppose the one thing that everybody will say about this will point out the no possessions hypocrisy. Give me your comment on that, and then I'm going to give my 2 pennies worth afterwards. Go on.
The thing I remember about that particular 3-4 minute sequence, it's so iconic. You know, the whole white room that's empty apart from a white piano, white shutters, you know, that was what was played in that winter of 1980 constantly on the TV. That was always, it wasn't the Beatles stuff, it was him singing Imagine. And I'll always remember that. Again, that's ingrained in my memory as one of those memories of 1980 when he died. I don't know, it's quite a polarising song, isn't it? I mean, it got voted one of the top songs of the millennium back in whenever it was, 99, 2000, when they had this massive poll, didn't they, to try and find the songwriters and the song and the singer of the last 100 years. But I don't know, there's a lot of division over it. I quite like it. I can get quite tired of the song sometimes because it is so familiar. You know, it's when it's Imagine again on the radio, you know. But at the same time, it was, you imagine 1972, it was just John Lennon, you know, singing this whole song about peace and love and this idealised world. And as you say, one of the richest performers in the world, sitting in this massive empty house that cost millions and, yeah, talking about no possessions.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked about this before on the show, but I'm going to defend him a little bit. First of all, he's saying imagine no possessions. And I think it's possible to have ideas for the world that you don't necessarily are not particularly good at following. And that's probably a really bad explanation. It's kind of like if I said to you, if I was a very impatient person, I don't know, I'm going to say I'm not, but if I'm an impatient person and someone, I don't know, I've got 4 nephews, for example, and I said to them, guys, you know, the thing you need in life is patience. Right. If I turn round and I say, and I'm then impatient with them, they could say, hey, uncle, you know, you told us not to be patient. Sorry, you told us to be patient, and look at you, you're being impatient.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, but I can say, well, that's something that I'm wrestling with, my impatience, but I know it's a good idea.
Yeah, the thoughts
so
there.
I kind of look at it a little bit like that. The other thing is that John Lennon couldn't have a normal house on a street because in Pete Shotton's book, they talked about, you know, they tried to go to a pub. John Lennon said, I can't go to the pub. It won't happen. And Pete Shotton said, come on, it'd be fine. And then they went to a local pub and he got besieged within 2 minutes.
Yeah, you can imagine, that side of things, how difficult it would be, you know. And also, it's 2 years since the Beatles have broken up.
Yep.
He needs to isolate himself a wee bit. You know, look at the backlash he got from Yoko Ono, you know, from that whole, she was the one that broke up the Beatles. In the 88 one, when we get to that, you know, somebody screams out, John, she's ugly.
Yeah, she's horrible.
She's horrible, you know, and it's like, oh my God, you know. So he just needed to distance himself completely from it. And that was probably the best way for him to do it, was to build a studio in this dirty great house in, is it Ascot, isn't it? I think
Ascot,
yeah. And just get on with what he wants to do and just spend some time with the woman he loves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, George as well bought Friar Park, massive house in Henley. Paul went sort of the other route, and I mean, he had a house in St John's Wood, but he had like a small farm. But
that's right, yeah.
I think there's a case to say that all 4 of them basically had nervous breakdowns at some point.
Can you imagine? You know, that whole, I'm saying the word imagine quite ironically here. But to go from 1960, well, even before 1962, you know, constantly performing, and bang, when the American invasion happened in 64, that was it. It just exploded. And you can see why they gave up touring 66. It was just too much. Because the world had never seen anything like that before. Rock and roll, all right, started 56 with Elvis or whenever it may have been. But before that, we never had superstars on that level. Frank Sinatra was probably the closest that, you know, the Americans had ever got to somebody being a superstar and getting that much adulation and that much public scrutiny. And you can just see why all 4 of them said, right, we're just going to shut ourselves away now, do what we want to do. They all got families, you know, we're going to just do what we need to do just to try and get some sense of normality.
Yeah. I mean, we've concluded, I've had guests on, we've all concluded that we wouldn't actually have wanted to be one of the Beatles then. I'd like to be like Jimmy Nicol and done it for like 2 weeks or something. That would have been good, wouldn't it?
Just a quick tour, yeah.
Yeah, just a taste of it and then you can leave, yeah. All right. The next one is Crippled Inside. Now, as a song, I've always loved this song.
Yes.
Sometimes it's kind of context. I just remember hearing it in a particular context and just absolutely loving it. And I think I like, there's a nice juxtaposition of a sort of jaunty song, but with quite serious lyrics, you know, quite deep message.
Yeah. It always struck me at first when I first heard it was Crippled Inside, and I'm trying to think, okay, just trying to wrestle myself with what it all actually means. But as you say, when you listen to it, it's quite a bouncy little number, really.
Yes, yeah.
What are the visuals to this on the video? You have to remind me, because I can remember like the Imagine one, but what's the actual visuals for this?
It starts with some brilliantly shaky footage, which almost reminds me a bit of Day in the Life.
Yep.
My American friend called them goofy camera angles. There's this sort of shaky footage, I think of like a city or something.
Yeah.
And then mostly it's the shooting the cover of Imagine with Dan Richter.
Yes.
On my show, name checking there. And then there's this sort of footage of this, looks like some sort of kind of party with some tables laid out, and there's Andy Warhol.
Ah, yeah, that's it.
And then he's playing basketball with Miles Davis. It's all brilliantly random. I love this film for its randomness.
This is great because there's some great cameos coming up. And if you were to look at the cast list, I mean, I think it's the only time that Jack Palance and Fred Astaire have appeared in the same movie together.
That's right, yeah. There was footage of Jack Nicholson in the 2000 film, It's basically the same footage as this, but with Jack Nicholson in there. He's not in this one.
Jack Nicholson, wow, okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I don't think it's even video. It might be. I think it's just a still shot of him standing next to John Lennon. I'm not sure. Another thing with this song is, are you aware of Nicky Hopkins, the piano player, like a session piano player?
Yeah, well, I know of Nicky Hopkins, yeah.
Well, I mean, fantastic. Some of the songs he was on in the 60s, I mean, he was on Revolution, did the electric piano. Sympathy for the Devil, he does that piano. Sunny Afternoon by the Kinks. I mean, he's just a brilliant sort of bluesy, slightly jazzy, I suppose, player. Anything else with that?
No, it's just, you're quite right in saying that the lyrics to Crippled Inside, I mean, he must have wrote this 71, 72 or whatever. And it's that whole thing, you can wear a mask and paint your face, but nobody knows what's going on inside. And again, that sort of highlights what I was saying about that whole public persona that had been gone on for the previous 10 years. It's time for a bit of introspection and a bit of like living my own life now. And yeah, perfect example of it. Crippled Inside, great tune, but it's just that juxtaposition of the darker lyrics with the jaunty actual music itself. Yeah.
There's a funny thing actually, I noticed this. It's one of these little details I noticed with the Beatles. If you take Tomorrow Never Knows, Strawberry Fields and Revolution 9, they're all quite disturbing in a way.
Yeah.
You know, like psychically disturbing.
Not an easy listen sometimes. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Strawberry Fields is such a lovely song as well, such a great melody that it's easy to listen to. But they all have this sort of slightly sinister psychosis going around them. All three of those have a jaunty piano at the end.
They do.
Yeah, listeners, play those three songs. All three have a jaunty piano, and it's even sort of scary on Revolution 9. It goes din 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 din, and then she says, "You become naked." Wow. It's right at the end of Revolution 9.
There you
I
go.
thought that was an interesting touch.
When did Billy Preston become part of the keyboard action?
With them?
Yeah.
Beginning of 69.
Yeah. So this is all pre-Billy Preston type stuff, isn't it? Yeah.
I think the piano was mostly Paul on those ones.
Usually.
I'm not sure about Revolution 9. I don't know how much of the piano was a sample and how much was actually done at the time.
Yeah.
And then, like, before Jealous Guy, we get this bizarre clip of John Lennon on the toilet.
Yeah.
Presumably doing a number 2.
Yeah.
Yoko says, "How is it?" And John says, "Very good." But he's also reading the newspaper, so he might be talking about the newspaper article.
We don't know what they're up to. She's reading a copy of The Sun in bed.
Oh, yeah.
And then they both get up and go to the window, and it looks as if they're saying hello to themselves, sitting out on the patio.
To another John Yoko, yeah. I kind of love it about this film, because I was trying to kind of make sense of it, and I've got a couple of theories about a couple of bits later on, but I know you don't really need to understand it. It's just, that could be a comment on duality, you know?
Could be absolutely anything. It could be people looking in on their lives, or who knows? Who knows? It's just two people that have got a lot of money and a lot of time on their hands, having a bit of fun at the end of the day. That's what this whole movie. It's not even a movie. It's a video EP almost. It's
video
quite
collection.
It's quite clever, isn't it? Because it's a great promotional tool. Long before MTV, you know, they've made videos for each track on the album pretty much, and spliced it all together in 1 hour-long promotional tool, basically.
Yeah, well, I suppose nowadays, things that weren't thought of as music videos then now are. I mean, with the Beatles, all the ones they did on Hard Day's Night, you know, they performed If I Fell, Should Have Known Better, In the Train.
Yeah.
They're all now music videos. And they, you know, I've always wondered, some people would say there's a sort of pointlessness about some music videos because they'll put the band in a particular setting that's got nothing to do with the song. Like, something like Bohemian Rhapsody is really good because when you get to the opera bit, and obviously those voices were clearly doubled, so it sounds like there's about 12 people singing. Yeah. Well, that's why you have that shot where the faces go. I don't know how to explain it.
Well, that's why it was specifically recorded, that video, wasn't it? Because they said they're not going to go on top of the pops and mime that operatic bit at the end because it will look so false. And then didn't the Beatles do a couple for Ed Sullivan? Was it Rain and...
Yeah,
Paperback Writer, wasn't it? They did because they couldn't get over to the States, or they weren't, willing to travel to the States to perform live. But at this point, so they created a couple of videos, didn't they? Yeah.
Well, the brilliant story about that is that they'd heard that Elvis, instead of touring, had sent his Cadillac on tour.
That's right.
people would just pay to admire his Cadillac, so they thought, well, we won't do that, but we'll put a video of ourselves on tour. You know, it's so logical as well if you think about it.
Of course it is.
The evolution of video, it's like a film, isn't it, basically, a short film.
Yeah.
You know, someone had to invent that. All right, we get to Jealous Guy, which starts with, obviously, Nicky Hopkins again on piano. He's very much lauded for this. Starts with sort of black limo, or is that supposed to be a hearse?
It's a hearse.
It's a hearse.
It's got a flat back to it. If you look in the long glass windows, there's two straps hanging down that would hold the coffin in place.
Blimey, so tell us what that's all about then.
I have no idea, because the thing that fascinates me about this part of the film itself is it just starts off with this wonderful shot of them, you know, and the camera moves back.
Yeah.
And you got no idea that it's a helicopter shot until it lifts up and starts filming the hearse from however many hundreds of feet, well, not even hundreds of feet, but 100 feet above or whatever, following this hearse around the estate at Tittenhurst with Jealous Guy playing in the background. And you just think, yeah, okay. And I like this. Is one of the more fascinating parts of it for me, because I'm thinking, technically, if they're only doing this whole movie for a bit of fun, this is the most expensive home movie ever made, because they must have had a helicopter and people operating the cameras and, you know, all that sort of stuff that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And this is what makes the 72 version really fascinating for me. It's just more than a passion project. It's become something a little bit more advanced, but at this point. Yeah,
I struggled with a lot of this to sort of connect the music with the images, though. It seemed quite random to me.
There might not be any connection at all.
Yeah.
It's just, even at the time, you know, when they're filming all these particular sequences, they may not have had any idea that that particular track is going to go with that particular part we filmed. It's not until they got together and they thought, okay, we'll put Jealous Guy here, or we'll use this bit of footage for It's So Hard, or whatever, you know. Who knows? Yeah. It's totally random. It's abstract. It's great.
Yeah, it is. Dan Richter, who we mentioned earlier, he actually lived with them. You can see all these imagined things. He's generally wearing an orange jumper, collar neck, I think it is. I asked him about, you know, what was life with John and Yoko like, and he said the two of the things were that John was always creating, like he was always coming up with ideas. And Dan Richter also said that, you know, this is no secret that John generally had a joint going as well when he was at home, you know. And I mean, you know, I lived in London when I was in my 20s, and I lived in Grove, and we had a 4-share house, and one of my flatmates was Australian, and the stereotype in this case was true, that they would bring a lot of their mates round. So we always had a very, very full house. And, you know, there was a bit of weed going around. I'm not going to pretend there wasn't. And, you know, there were a few creative people there. I count myself as a creative person. And, you know, you toss out ideas, but I think you need to be kind of relatively weed-free to kind of put them together. And I think it might be fair to say that John and Yoko perhaps didn't have that time where they put them together coherently. I could be wrong about that, of course.
Yeah, there is some very surreal stuff going on here, but there's also some very creative, some very inventive visuals as well throughout the running time. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, the other thing, of course, about the house, I mean, Tittenhurst Park in Berkshire, it was bought in, I think it was June 69. It was a few £100,000, obviously, today. That's a ridiculously large amount. One of the bizarre things, again, when we were talking about 69, was that they were apparently having financial trouble, and John had said they'd be broke in 6 months. Then he goes off and buys this house. And George buys Friar Park.
Yeah.
And you're like, 72 acres that house was.
Blimey. Yeah, because Julian says, doesn't he, there's 99 acres with a lake and all of this. And
yeah, he wasn't quite right, but 72.
No, 72 was it? And mid-69, I mean, is that the Alan Klein era?
Yeah,
it is, isn't it? So Apple was probably starting and collapsing around about this sort of time as well. You know, there was a lot of financial mistakes made after Epstein died, which is well documented, you know.
Yeah, I think with their finances, they never really, I mean, the early days they received a weekly pay slip from Brian Epstein.
That's right.
61, 62. After that, they probably had no idea how much money they had, and what they'd basically just, their collateral was their ability to make hits and make lots of money for the record company. So John probably said, well, I want to buy this house.
Yeah, I think I've deserved it now at this point in my career. You know, I've earned it now.
I need some privacy. I need a big back garden. I've been revisiting a few of the sites, and I went to George's house in Arnold Grove, which is a place called Wavertree. And it's what... you'll know what a 2 up, 2 down means.
I live in one.
Oh, you live in one, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So 2 rooms, downstairs, 2 rooms upstairs, and they had 4 children, including George.
Yeah.
And I mean, the journey from there to Friar Park, which he bought when he was 26.
Incredible. And you forget how young he actually was, really, as well, don't you? Because he was the youngest of the 4.
Yeah, that's right.
And even in 1972, he'd have only been 27?
He was born in 43, so he would have been not even 30.
29, yeah. And it's incredible that these guys like Lennon's only 32 at this point, and he's not even in his 30s. Incredible story, as you know, which is why we like talking about them. It's just a fascinating thing from start to finish.
Yeah, it just goes on and on, doesn't it? Mm. All right, now we get to Don't Count the Waves. So, first appearance of Yoko. Can you give me your general assessment of Yoko? Not so much as a person, because I don't really... I've gone against sort of making judgments, not being first-hand, but as an artist and as a presence in John Lennon's life.
I've never been one of these ones to judge her role in the breakup of the Beatles as is generally perceived, because there was a lot of other stuff going on in 69, you know. McCartney wanted his father-in-law to take over as manager, didn't he, at one point before Klein came on board? And you could tell when you watch Let It Be that the friction amongst the 4 of them, that the spark has gone. There's no enjoyment. They're not enjoying it anymore, which is why they wanted to go back, or John in particular wanted to go back to the rock and roll roots and wanted to play what ended up being on top of the Apple building, didn't it? But, you know, he wanted some... I can't remember what it was. There was some grand scheme he wanted for some concert somewhere, like Pompeii or somewhere, the Floyd done.
Yeah, well, they talked about loads of them. Tunisia as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can just tell the spark has gone. And Yoko wasn't the instigator of any of it. She just happened to be there at the time the band was collapsing. That's my opinion, anyway. I don't think... You know, when people say she was, you know, it's become sort of modern parlance now, hasn't it? That she's the Yoko of the group. You know, they use that to relate to anything nowadays. But no, and never ever been a fan of her music. Quite honestly, it's an acquired taste. If you're to look up on the internet the lyrics to "Don't Count the Waves," it is "Don't Count the Waves" repeated 32 times or something like that, because that's literally all it is.
Yeah,
but it's an interesting little insertion into this particular movie, and I quite enjoyed it. As I say, not being a massive fan of her musically. Is this the one? Are they playing on the chessboard at this point?
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
which is her chessboard, isn't it? It's a piece of artwork she designed.
Yeah, well, of course, the main thing is that all the pieces are white. So you can't, it's white against white, so you can't win the game.
And the actual piece itself, I think, is entitled something like "Put Yourself Over to Trust" or something like that, because you don't know what piece belongs to who. You've got to trust your opponent to be moving the right pieces. And it's called something like, "Put Yourself Over to Trust" or something. It's quite a famous piece. She still exhibits it now, apparently, when she does retrospectives of her artwork. Yeah.
Interesting. I think the thing with only having those lyrics, of course, he was influenced by that. You know, "I Want You, She's So Heavy."
Yeah.
But hardly any lyrics.
That's true.
So that sort of minimalism, I mean, she was sort of steeped in... She would have known a lot about the minimalism movement, and I'm sure she turned John Lennon onto that. I mean, I like that kind of thing as well, because it's very uncomplicated. You know, there's not too many lyrics to worry about. But obviously there's like very, very heavy echo, and I think the echo increases as it goes on. I would direct listeners, if you want to hear the most conventional Yoko Ono album, it will probably be one called Approximately Infinite Universe. Mm-hmm. Which came out in 72. Again, I'm pretty sure most or all of it will be on YouTube. That's more accessible. I mean, it is tough to listen to, say, her album Fly, but you can take some great ideas from it, you know. I mean, the thing when she's screaming, but in a way, it's like it's challenging the listener, you know. Can you get through this album? Have you got what it takes?
Yeah, and you can imagine, she was known as being an artist. That's how we met her. You know, she was doing an art exhibition in London. And if you're that naturally creative person, which by the sound of things you are yourself, Anthony, if you've got access to music, a studio, one of the biggest musicians in the world, and all you've done so far is visual art, you're going to try your hand at a bit of audio, aren't you? You've got to express yourselves. But it's not my cup of tea, put it that way.
No, I understand. People will call her an opportunist. You'll probably find that most people would take opportunities if they're given, because life is hard, you know. It's not a picnic, so...
But also what's evident in this and in the 88 one is that they were genuinely in love.
Yeah,
the love between them is absolutely evident throughout the whole running time of this film. So, for people to say, oh, she was an opportunist, or, the whole circumstances of them getting together, or no, they were two people genuinely in love, and it was, highly evident, as I say.
Yeah, absolutely. With the chess match, I mean, a couple of observations I made. I mean, as I said, all the pieces are white. They start moving them around randomly. They start putting them on top of each other. Yoko starts putting chess pieces in a cleavage.
Yes.
I have to say as well, she's very, very sexual in this period. And quite sexy as well.
Lots of short shorts and, yeah.
Yeah, she looks quite attractive, I must say. And then John starts putting them in his mouth. Again, I don't think you really need to necessarily ascribe a meaning, but you could think of, chess as a metaphor for life. You're never going to win this game, It's an ongoing game, and it's weird as well.
It could be absolutely anything, It's similar to like they're playing snooker, and that develops into something completely different later on as well. But
it certainly does. Yeah.
I'm just convinced that the visuals were filmed just randomly. They've got this idea as they're filming it over a 12-month period or whatever it was, and it's like, right, let's go and do this. Or there are certain bits that were totally off the cuff when they're filming out in the street with the stethoscopes and stuff like that. And it's when it comes to editing that I'm convinced that there wasn't a lot of like, right, well, this visual actually works with this tune. This is why we're putting it together. I don't think it's meant to be interpreted. There's some people that could probably interpret this and write huge, great thesis on it. Yeah. They could spend a lifetime dissecting this movie if they wanted to. But I don't think anyone would ever get to the bottom of it. Yeah.
Okay, then we get to It's So Hard. Another very interesting idea. This is the guy walking down the street who's completely covered with, I don't know, what people might recognise as a burqa, but without the eye holes.
Yes.
Completely covered from head to toe, and he's wearing white shoes, which makes me think that it might be John Lennon.
I think it is.
Quite like wearing white sneakers.
I think it is.
You think it is, right?
And it also ties in with the bagism thing that we see later in the 88 version.
Absolutely.
About, don't judge me by the length of my hair. Don't look at my face and make your own judgment based on me or my look. It's what I'm saying that's important. Isn't there a scene later on in the church where there's 2 or 3 women, men, not too sure, also dressed similarly, sitting in the congregation?
Is that the one where he's sort of doing a kind of babbling preacher?
Yeah, thing? And the audience, there's 2 or 3 people in the audience also wearing these full-length masks. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you said that about the bagism, because I think, this bagism and total communication, I love it, And I mean, if you went to a job interview dressed in a bag, you probably wouldn't get the job, let's be honest. But maybe that means because the people are too square to accept someone who's trying to eradicate the limitations of colour and...
Yes, he had a point, didn't he? He had a bloody point. It was,
Yeah.
A lot of people laughed at him, took the mickey out of him, and that's evident in some of the, the press interviews at the time. But no, it makes a lot of sense.
It does, yeah. I used to work with activists as well. I was involved in sort of, not protests as such, but we used to screen documentaries because I got very interested in alternative information. People write stuff off as conspiracy theories, and some are, the Paul is dead, for example. But fortunately, a lot of them get lumped together. But there's actually a lot of alternative ideas, which is basically stuff you don't hear on the news. And obviously, the internet has exploded with documentaries that some get wide distribution, some are just internet only. But it's very interesting when you challenge people and you give them something that they've never seen before, how they react. Generally, they're either curious, they laugh, or they get angry. Kind of one of those 3 things.
Yeah.
And so my kind of buzz, if you like, from that, we'd show documentaries about, like, the banking industry, actually, pre the crash.
Yeah.
Or things about propaganda. Propaganda is a subject I've studied basically in my own time, probably for 20-odd years. It's a fascinating topic. And when you present ideas, it's very interesting to see people's reaction. And I think John Lennon really showed the society for its kind of squareness in a way. And that all the people that maybe think they're quite hip, they actually do have sort of things that are off the table.
Yeah.
And it's fairly harmless sticking a bag on your head. It's not, You know what I mean? They show that the hip people can be also quite square.
Yeah, it's highlighted magically in the ballad of John and Yoko, isn't it? That whole period
Yeah.
of them getting married and laying in bed for a week in Amsterdam and all of that magical little period of that 6 months there. And,
Yeah.
you know, you could imagine that press attitudes that up to this point they were the lovable four mop tops, cheeky lads from Liverpool. But actually, they've got a voice, they've got something to say, and they're expressing it not just in their music. And I think it might have riled a few of the more serious journalists a bit. You know, it's like, hang on a minute, well, you're not supposed to have an opinion. You're here to entertain. And, you know, you can see that in some of the questions that are thrown at John and Yoko in later interviews. The journalists just don't get it. They don't get it at all.
Yeah, they don't know how to react to it either.
No.
You know, and I mean, okay, on reflection, some of it might be being a bit naive and a bit silly, but I don't know why it had to be so aggressive, you know. But, you know, the British press, you know, as well as I do, I mean, possibly the hardest in the world, maybe, because we've got so many tabloids in this country.
That's right. Well, yeah, and even then, there was probably even more back then as well, because we've lost a few. But, yeah, it's that whole scrutiny thing as well, isn't it, being in the public eye. But when John and Yoko were making their protests or making their points with the baggism and the bed-ins and all of that lot, they invited the press in. It wasn't as if there was some intrusion into their life. They wanted to say something and they wanted to get a point across. And as you say, the journalists just didn't get it at all.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's move on. Yoko again, Mrs. Lennon.
Yeah.
Quite a nice song. John on piano here. I always found like vulnerability is a very kind of attractive quality. And John Lennon obviously showed his vulnerability a lot. Yoko, there's a bit where she's crying and...
Yeah, there's a couple of great tracks on here that I'm not too familiar with, even though I've got the Imagine album, which I've listened to a fair few times. And you know when you do have your favourites and you listen to side ones of certain albums or B-sides. And Mrs. Lennon, I mean, I'm just looking at the lyrics now. And it's actually quite a beautiful little song when you look at it. I mean, the first verse, Mrs. Lennon, oh Mrs. Lennon, checking the sky to see if there's no clouds. There's no clouds. Oh, then I guess it must be all right. And then it goes into a bit of a protest bit. You know, the children have gone to war. Half the world is always killed, you know. It's all very deep stuff.
Yeah, well, she was in Japan, of course, and I don't think... I mean, she can't have been in the cities where they were bombed, obviously. But was she based in Tokyo? Let's think. She was born in 1933.
Wow, yeah, you keep forgetting she's...
The bombs were in 1945.
Yeah, she's 7 years older than Lennon, isn't she? You forget that, yeah.
I'm going to find out
where she was actually born.
Another thing, going back to this activist thing about history as well, because one of my big things really is the fact that we're given a sort of very much a official view of history, you know, at school and stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the things that actually the firebombing of Tokyo.
Yeah.
I went on for I think it was like a year or something.
Yeah.
It was actually more destructive than the bombs.
Yeah.
Anyways.
She was born in Tokyo, 1933.
Right. Moved to New York City in 1940. Okay, so she wasn't actually... Oh, no. The next year she was transferred. The family returned to Japan. Starvation was rampant in the destruction that followed the Tokyo bombings. The Ono family were forced to beg for food while pulling their belongings with them in a wheelbarrow. Wow. So we always think of her as brought up very affluently, don't we?
Yeah. Her father was a classical pianist and a banker.
That's right. Yeah.
So, yeah, another fascinating story that I don't know too much about. I mean, I only know post-69 Yoko Ono, so...
Yeah. Well, Klaus Warman, who you would have heard, obviously. Yes. When they did the live piece in Toronto, 69, he included a little audio clip of him, and he was saying, I saw it from a different perspective, very kind of open-minded perspective. And he said she was screaming, you know... He said it could have been a need for peace in the world, but I think perhaps she was channeling her life in Tokyo as a little girl. That seemed to make a lot of sense to me.
It does, doesn't it? Is that the Sweet Toronto concert you're on about? Is that
yeah. Amazing, yeah. He's definitely off his head on that one. And Clapton. It's so
Eric Clapton's there as well.
Such a heavy vibe around that concert.
Great concert, that one. One of my favourites.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would just say she's very childlike there. And, and there are bits with John and Yoko. I mean, you know, he called her mother.
He did, yes, yeah.
Maybe he isn't as weird as it seems, because sometimes, I don't know, if I take, for example, my mother, you know, after a certain, she said, I stopped being Francis and I became Mum at a certain point.
Right.
Everyone starts calling her Mum, almost like it's her name. So my dad would say Mum, meaning your mother. So, but I think there's a few like bits. There's a bit with them when they're in the bath.
Yes.
And he's kind of lower down than her, and it almost seems a bit like she's, what's the word? Can't think of the right word. Not like swaddling him, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, a bit like a Japanese geisha almost bathing him and sort of looking after him almost, yeah. There's a lot of ways in that she was maybe a bit tougher than he was. I mean, I think he was quite streetwise. Yeah. But I think there was a childlike thing about him. It's unmistakable. Well, then we get to this great bit where he's doing this. How would you describe it? He's doing this sort of cod preacher. The Holy Mary, Mother and the Holy Spirit. He's doing stuff like that. And it's definitely his voice. And there's a brilliant bit. He says, "Amen" and women. Brilliant. Well, that's
a little bit of feminism.
That's John Lennon all over, isn't it? You know, with Spaniard in the Works, and you know how creative his mind was with wordplay. Just something simple like "Amen" and women. That's typical John Lennon. Yeah,
I love it. And then we get to a song which is one of my favourites. I absolutely love it. I Don't Want to Be a Soldier.
Yes, yeah.
It's progressive. It's got this Nicky Hopkins once again, but loads of echo on the piano. George did the guitar. It's very simple, just the lyrics and everything. Oh, I love it. Again, it's probably a bit of a mood piece. If you weren't really in the mood for 6 minutes of kind of repetition, I think in the right mood, it's really amazing.
And again, quite creative lyrically. You know, I don't want to be a rich man. I don't want to cry.
Yeah, I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to lie.
I don't want to lie. Perfect. You know.
Yeah. I was teaching a bunch of lawyers last year in Madrid. With a Spanish accent, they sometimes mispronounce words.
Yeah.
And one of them kept saying liars when he meant to say lawyers. And I told him, like, he's a nice guy and a good level of English. I said, oh, yeah, just be careful with that. Confirming a stereotype there, my friend. Yeah, the playing's a little bit shoddy on this, but again, it kind of works. It's a bit sort of jerky if you're going to be critical about the music.
Yeah.
But about 3 minutes in, when might be getting a bit tedious and repetitious, then you get King Curtis coming in with his sax solo.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah. Do you know the story of that? I mean, this is...
No, go on, tell me.
Well, he played on lots of famous songs. Yakety Yak by the Coasters.
Yes, yeah.
He did the solo on Respect by Aretha Franklin.
Mm.
He died in August of 71. Yeah, so a matter of months after he recorded this. He was killed by some drug dealers. I don't think he was involved in it. Some drug dealers were arguing outside his house, and he went out to see what was what, and one of them stabbed him. How about this for an irony? He was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital.
Oh, my God.
And, of course, this is August 71. Of course, 9 and a bit years later, John Lennon will be rushed to Roosevelt Hospital.
Yeah.
Horrible. Why don't you talk about this bit about Yoko leading all these guys through the door that you were talking about earlier?
Well, as I say, if you were to look at a cast list of any movie, and it features Fred Astaire and Jack Palance, but then also, like you said earlier, you've got Miles Davis and Andy Warhol making appearances in this, as well as Dick Cavett is in this part as well, isn't he?
Yep.
And I think at one point when I think they're singing Give Peace a Chance, which actually might be in the other movie, I can't remember, as I say, these are moulding into one at the moment. Isn't Timothy Leary in there as well on the floor?
That's Give Peace a Chance,
yeah. So it's just incredible. I'm assuming that Astaire and Palance were guests on the Dick Cavett show, on the same one that he appeared on. Which
I don't know, I'm not sure.
It's the famous appearance, isn't it, that's used in Forrest Gump, isn't it? I think he appeared on Dick Cavett twice.
Yeah.
But famously, there's the bit, with Forrest Gump is superimposed on the... So I'm just assuming they're all at the, whatever it is, the Ed Sullivan Theatre or whatever it is in New York or somewhere in LA at some studios, recording the Dick Cavett show. And just happened to be like Fred Astaire walking one and Jack Palance, who seemed bloody good sports. Apparently, Fred Astaire asked for a second take. He wasn't pleased with his 2-second performance of opening a door and walking across the room.
Was that the appearance where John Lennon's wearing the army jacket?
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually September the 11th, weirdly enough, 1971.
Oh, wow, there you go.
Yeah, and then they appeared in 72. They were mostly talking about the deportation case then.
Yeah.
That's a good appearance. He looks very nervous and kind of jerky on the 71 appearance. I think I was referencing the Ray Coleman biography.
Yes.
And it's a good sort of starting point, but it's a little bit innocent. It kind of makes out that he kind of given up drugs by about 71, 72, which I don't think was true. Because on this Dick Cavett, I don't know, it could be just he was nervous. But John Lennon in the 70s is very kind of jerky, lots of sort of facial movements and things. And anyway, it's a digression. And then the French guy comes in dancing to this sort of very French music. Sort of ballet dancer, looks like Nureyev or someone, but a French.
Again, it's not saying they're hangers-on, but there's this very eclectic group of people that are involved in this whole production. Because George Harrison turns up as well, doesn't he? He comes through the door at this point.
Yeah,
well.
With a kind of a cat weasel beard he had at that time. Kind of pointed beard. Yeah.
But still looks 21 or whatever. He still looks like a baby. It's incredible. That man never aged.
Yeah, I suppose entourage is a polite word for hangers-on,
That's
isn't it?
yeah. But I don't think it was sort of entourage or even hangers-on. It was just people were... just happened to be in the same building at the same time, and it's like, we've got a camera here. How about giving us 5 minutes of your time? And I think that's what happened. Like the scene at the party, where they're around the barbecue and there's Andy Warhol and Miles Davis. That's just somebody's home movie, pretty much.
Yeah.
And it's just, spliced into this whole finished production.
Well, I mean, why not? That's the thing. It's don't know whether you'd argue that films are more controlled now or less, but that sort of 70s period. Have you ever read the book Easy Riders, Raging Bulls?
Yes, one of my favourites. Riskind? Someone Riskind?
Riskind, yeah. I knew you would have read that somehow.
He's done quite a few, actually. I've got about 3 or 4 of his.
Yeah, he did a trilogy, didn't he? There's one about the 50s. And
that's it.
But that whole period, I mean, it's Easy Riders, Raging Bulls. I'd even go a little bit further and say Bonnie and Clyde was maybe the first example, 67.
The
Raging
year that
Bull was
killed Hollywood.
1980.
Apparently, there's a great one I think he did. I think he argues the fact that 67 or 69 is the year that Hollywood died, the studio system, because you had things like Bonnie and Clyde coming out, and Easy Rider, but also in one last gasp from the Hollywood studio system. If you look at the 4 or the 5 Best Picture nominees that year, there's these 3 or 4 independent things like Bonnie and Clyde, Easy Rider, whatever. But sticking out like a sore thumb is 20th Century Fox's Dr. Dolittle with Rex Harrison.
Oh, yeah.
It's just incredible. It's just like you can see the horizon that there's this new wave of filmmaking coming along, the Coppolas, the Spielbergs, the Lucases, all of these guys. And Fox is still trying to desperately churn out this crowd-pleasing musical, which was a massive flop, Dr. Dolittle, not too long after the Cleopatra debacle, so that just signed its death warrant for the studio system, which is why from 70 onwards you get The Godfather and all of, Badlands and just develops into American Graffiti, into Star Wars, into Jaws, into whatever. Fascinating. The 70s, I mean, we focused on the 70s quite a bit in Stinking Paws because it's a never-ending, bottomless well of marvellous, marvellous movies.
Oh, God, yeah. Well, I think there are a few reasons. They call it the American New Wave, if you want to sort of put a tag on it.
Yeah.
There are a few reasons, really. Suddenly you had all these filmmakers who'd been to film school, like Scorsese, Coppola, Lucas, and they'd all seen these Russian and German expressionist films.
Yeah.
Something like French Connection, there's lots of bits of that look a bit like a documentary.
Yeah.
Also, the Hollywood producers were doing too much coke. That's the other thing that Biskin said. So they loosened their grip a little bit. And they kind of got into this swinging 60s thing. I'm sure a lot of it was down to sex as well, the availability of it. And,
that's it. Of course, Robert Evans died this week as well, didn't he, the producer?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he died a couple of days ago. Yeah, responsible for most of those movies, pretty much.
Yeah, he's one of those ones that doesn't come across well in this book. But
that's it, yeah.
You can't deny he was part of it. Yeah, so anyway, another thing about this whole Imagine film that we're talking about, I say the production values are not great. To me, that's part of its charm. I mean, it does look like a home movie.
I don't think they're meant to be. I don't think they're meant to be great. I think that was the whole thing. Yeah. It was a passion project. They just needed something to occupy their time, but also be creative. And possibly for Lennon, it was a new medium for him because he's more musical, as we know, but he went to art school, so there's that side of him. And he's with this lover or hater, this incredibly creative and artistic woman. Yeah. And what better way of killing 12 months than to make your own home movie, but let's make it something a little bit special.
Yeah, and very wacky. All right, we get to Give Me Some Truth. I did a podcast about this song, actually, and I did a podcast about, the whole thing was called Give Me Some Truth. It was about truth in general.
Right.
That elusive thing. George on guitar again. The footage for this This one is very much associated with the song because it's mostly protest marches.
Yeah.
And there's a few clips of the grapefruit launch you were talking about before,
right,
and then
yeah.
there's a few clips of John at the mic doing his lead vocal. Do you like this song?
It's one that's always sort of stuck with me. There was a greatest hits. No, it wasn't a greatest hits. There was something that it was featured on. I don't know if it was a soundtrack album to some other movie. But I was always quite familiar with it at the time, not at the time of release, obviously, but it was used somewhere. It might have been an old Vietnam movie or something where they used it. It was, typical for a Vietnam movie. It'll either be The Doors or Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival, the go-to choices. But and one of them, or something I saw, it was Give Me Some Truth, was used. So I've just got visuals of, similar to what this is, of like protest marches and college riots and the Vietnam War. Yeah,
Can't see it.
it might have been something. It might have been a documentary that was on the TV rather than a movie, but it was something that I'd seen a fair few times. And again, it's Angry Lennon. When you look at the difference in styles on the Imagine album itself, from Jealous Guy to this, incredible. Because it just proved what a versatile songwriter he actually was. He could get his point across. He could get whatever he was protesting about across in 4 or 5 verses, and then the next day he'd go and record one of the most beautiful love songs for his wife.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's never really going to get old either. I mean, it's a funny thing. I listen to loads of podcasts, and a lot of them are about sort of society and psychology and all that kind of things. And people are always, this guy argues that at any moment in history, people are always saying, oh, we live in weird times.
Yeah.
And that, we need some truth. And people say, oh, we need truth more than ever now. But they probably say that every time in history.
You think about it, yeah, probably have actually.
I'm very interested in the Titanic story, and I'm actually doing a podcast about that. Well, just for YouTube, I think. And when it was the 100th anniversary, my mum got me some copies of old newspapers. Yeah. It's very interesting. In 1912, they were talking about the pace of the modern world.
Okay, yeah.
So I think something like Give Me Some Truth, I mean, you must have seen the program Yes Minister.
Yes, yeah, I remember it well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge fan of that. I wrote a massive blog post. I watched every single episode.
Yeah.
Extensive notes, and spent months and months doing that. Yeah. It just laid out, really, as a comedy, everything that's shielded from the public.
Oh, so Humphrey is a fantastic character.
Of course he is, yeah.
Yeah, one of the great British, well, not even a sitcom, but, one of the great British comedy characters ever invented, because it was perfect timing. It was Thatcher's Britain, and it was just all this spin doctoring before that even became a phrase.
Yes.
And I was far too young to appreciate it at the time, but every now and again I'll catch one on YouTube or try and seek one out. And it is very, very clever writing, very clever, and it's still funny now, and it's probably even more relevant at the moment with what's going on with Brexit and God knows what else, politically. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what you should do is on YouTube, look at all the clips to do with the European Union.
Oh, right, okay, and we're talking 1979, 1980 or whatever it is, and it's
and what the European Union could be, what the real story could be about the European Union. But anyway, the point is that in Yes Minister, they kind of lay out why the public needs to be shielded from the truth for society to work. And it's a good argument, that in fact politicians do have to kind of block things. And in fact, the argument is if you've got a politician who was totally honest, then he wouldn't last 5 minutes in office. Because when you actually get someone who's very, I don't know what the word is, informal, let's say Trump when he first arrived. Yeah. And he's on the podium at the Republican debates, saying, oh, our politicians are bought off. In fact, I think I've bought all you lot off, he said about all his rivals. And I don't think the public wants to hear that. So I think the public will always be looking for truth, perhaps not realizing that they don't want to know the whole truth. This is kind of getting very deep psychological analysis here. It's a bit, I can't really explain it easily, but anyways. But I think that song is just going to be universal, isn't it, really? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Clearly, I don't think we're going to get to the other film, are we?
It's up to you. I mean, how long have we been going now?
Hour and a half?
Yeah, hour and 20. I've got it. Yeah.
That's crazy. Can we get through the last 4 videos and then we'll decide what we're going to do?
Meet up again at some point and do it. More than that.
We finish this off and then we'll have a chat about it.
Yeah.
All right.
So we now, Oh My Love, isn't it, next?
Yeah. So there's 5 left. Yeah. So we get to Oh My Love. Again, there's this lovely, I find it very charming, this sort of childlike embrace. They kind of hug each other. They look a bit like two children.
Yeah.
I think that's quite endearing myself.
It's one of those songs that I was aware of. I've heard it, obviously, having listened to the album. But listening to it last night and watching it with the visuals, it's another one of those just beautiful songs. For the first time in my life, my eyes are wide open. It's a very simple lyric, but it just hits home. You know, and as I said earlier, their love for each other is evident throughout this 50-odd minutes, this hour on screen. But when you couple it with the music, I mean, the visuals here perfectly match. Where I said before, perhaps things were filmed a little bit randomly and then music was matched to whatever visuals. I think this one is actually a perfect visuals matching the song. It was done specifically, I think, with this in mind.
Yeah, that's right. I think I'm right in thinking that Yoko actually had the original idea for the song.
Yeah.
She was supposed to be singing or writing about Kyoko, her daughter. And it is technically a co-write. Some people are obviously a bit cynical about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I would say she almost certainly had some input into it. But yeah, it's lovely for the first time in my life, as you said. My mind is wide open.
Yeah,
lovely.
very simple, isn't it? Simple, but just expresses their feelings for each other. It's quite simple. Yeah.
And what I was saying earlier, that amazing juxtaposition of him recording it and then getting angry with somebody. I mean, it's great stuff. I think about that. I was watching that last night, actually. Very funny. The other thing is that I did read some of that. When he was doing a vocal, either with the Beatles, probably solo, he used to think about his childhood and he used to think about all the pain in his life and all the people that died.
Right,
you know, Uncle George and his mother and Stuart Sutcliffe.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was actually verified, but that seemed to make sense. Because there's a sort of, if you take, I really like Paul McCartney as a songwriter. I'm not a huge fan of his solo career. I think if he trimmed it down and put out about 50% or even maybe 30%, because he's so prolific, if he had sort of more of quality control,
yeah,
he would have a great solo career. I think it's more quantity with some quality. But I think Paul McCartney's vocals have never quite achieved that emotional connection. One of the exceptions being Maybe I'm Amazed, because when you hear that song seems very real, and he says, I'm a lonely man who's in the middle of something that he doesn't understand.
Yes.
But I can't think of too many more examples where you get that kind of vulnerability. And with John Lennon, there's just so much of it.
It's from the heart, isn't it, I think, with Lennon. Like you say, perhaps that's what he is. Perhaps he's channeling something from his past.
Yeah, very possibly.
Yeah.
But I don't think that makes Paul McCartney a shallow person or John Lennon a deeper person. I think Paul McCartney just made a decision. He said, I like making up songs and making up characters.
Yeah.
And I think maybe he channels his emotions in another way. Maybe he does it privately. He used to do it with Linda, or I think it's more of a choice. I think he was capable of it. There's just this thing about John Lennon. I think it just cuts deep, and we don't know exactly why we connect with him a lot of the time, but we just do, you know.
Yeah, I mean, McCartney wrote some of the biggest selling ballads of all time. But I suppose if we were to examine the lyrics, you know, you've just got to think, well, hang on a minute. How deep are they? We don't know. I mean, in the 70s, My Love, very simple again, but not as deep as Maybe I'm Amazed, certainly. Yeah.
I think sincere, but not...
yeah.
But I mean, who are we to say? I mean, the guy's written...
Exactly. What have I ever written? Nothing.
Yeah, I've written a few, but I haven't written hundreds of classics like Paul McCartney.
Yeah,
so.
exactly.
Okay, how do you sleep?
Well,
give you first shot at the pool table.
What do we make of this? I mean, fascinating using the locations there at the house. You know, right, we've got a snooker room. Let's make the most of it. But it's also doubled up as a library. So you've got the stepladder with Yoko sitting on the stepladder. And it starts off as a game of pool on a full-size snooker table, from what I can make out, because it's a massive, great table. And there's somebody sitting in a chair at the back that doesn't move. And they're there right from the beginning, aren't they? If I remember rightly, they don't move till the end. And as it just develops on and on, you get more people coming around the table, and more balls added to the table. It just becomes a bit like the chess game. Just becomes this random set of images. It has absolutely nothing to do with the lyrics of the song, which quite famously we know the story, that's who it's directed to, what it's about, and how it came about. But visually, you can't take your eyes off of it because you're thinking, where is this going? What on earth are they doing, you know? I mean, who are the people that are in that actual shot? Obviously, there's John and Yoko. It might be Dan Richter, might be one of them, it might be, I don't know, you know. But it just develops into this, well, again, just surreal. I found it fascinating because it just gripped me for that 3.5 minutes or whatever it was, because you just don't know where it's going to go.
I suppose if you did try and get visuals that fitted every song, then people might say it looked very contrived.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, I mean, what do you do with How Do You Sleep? Other than, well, he's not going to have like videos of Paul McCartney.
He's not going to have pictures
videos of people sleeping.
Yeah, because that, yeah, you can't deny anymore that it's not about Paul McCartney if you've got pictures of him being flashed up on the screen. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And then there were these kind of weird models on the wall, people with long noses that look quite phallic.
Yeah. And then one of them, as it gets to the last one, it's somebody's actually wearing the mask, aren't they? Because it moves. I think it moves. It looks like somebody's actually wearing it. You think you're looking at these set of things on a wall,
yeah,
and it gets to the last one, and it moves. I'm sure somebody's wearing the mask on the last one.
Oh, yeah, you could be right. Those things with the long noses and everything, that reminded me a bit of Clockwork Orange. Yeah, because when they attack the writer and his wife, and there's that horrible rape scene.
Yeah.
Very, very graphic. I'm sure maybe it's that house or another house. They have these weird models on the wall. But those are actually are phallic, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah. There are masks, I think, in that house, if I remember rightly. Yeah. Well, that's where he gets it from, isn't it? I don't know if did they turn up with the masks? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. It opens the door, doesn't it? Yeah.
I actually had a dream a couple of years ago, which was very similar to this pool table thing.
Okay.
I used to play a lot of pool when I was in Madrid. I like snooker and pool. I had a dream that some of my musician friends and I went to a pool table and we were playing pool. In the dream, it was 20 minutes, even though dreams apparently just last like 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And we kept hitting the balls and we never potted anything. And then balls started appearing. And it was funny because I hadn't seen this video, this John Lennon pool game thing.
Yeah.
I watched it last night, actually. Before that, I'd probably seen clips. I hadn't watched it for like 10 years or something. So it's funny that I had a dream. Yeah, again, I took it, I mean, you can interpret it any way you want, but I took it as like, I don't know, the frustrations of life. They just keep accumulating. And you can never quite get rid of your problems. And
could be. Yeah, the never-ending game of pool, basically, yeah.
Yeah, again, pool is a metaphor for life. Like, we had chess as a metaphor for life.
Depends how deep you want to go with this movie.
Exactly.
From start to finish, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can just watch it. You can watch this whole thing and laugh at it. You can get into the music. You know, there's possibilities. All right. So there's a couple more. How? Again, I love the bridge of this song. Life can be long, but you've got to be so strong. In the world, she's tough. Sometimes I feel I've had enough. Not many people would put lyrics like that into songs. It's
typical John Lennon, but also very different as well from some of the stuff we've come across as well so far. You know, we're getting towards the end now. And, you know, we've had the full gamut of musical styles and opinions and lyrics and visuals. You know, it's like you say, you know, life can be long, you've got to be so strong. He's had a lot of time since the breakup of the Beatles to write some great tunes. And Imagine as a whole is a great album. I don't know what you think about the album itself.
I like it a lot,
It's one of your favourites, yeah. And as I say, what we've been saying all the way through this, just to create something quite unique, which is an extended music video on this scale that was pretty much unheard of. I mean, you could probably argue that, what was the Rolling Stones one, Rock and Roll Circus or whatever it was, that could be almost, you know, a similar sort of concept, or even Magical Mystery Tour itself. You know, that's one massive great music video. But I'm just impressed by the whole creativeness and the originality of this whole project, to be honest.
Good stuff. The visuals for How...
Is this the lady on the roof?
Yeah, the lady in like the yellow or saffron or whatever she's wearing. Just climbing around the house.
What's this about? Because it flashes back to them being on the rowing boat on the lake.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So you're thinking, okay, this is like an extension of the story from another angle. You know, they've gone off for a quick row around the estate. Meanwhile, this woman looks like she's breaking into the house at first. We don't know what she's doing or what she's up to, yeah.
I've got nothing to say about that, except that it's hilarious.
And who is she?
Who
is she as well? That's the other thing.
Yeah, exactly. All right, and then we get to Oh Yoko. John Yoko in the bath again. Again, as like I said earlier, he looks a bit like a child.
Yeah.
It's kind of comforting him. And he's naked, of course. We don't see their naked bodies on this occasion, though we've already seen them, haven't we?
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, he talked a lot about the metaphor of nakedness, you know, and that they were two virgins. Because
that's right.
On Don't Let Me Down, he sings I'm in love for the first time, which if I was Cynthia Lennon listening to that, I'd have probably got quite annoyed, you know, but you know what he means. I mean,
yeah.
Absolute true love connection, you know. Do you like the song?
I do like the song, and I like the way this is presented here as well. Because if you watch the 88 version, which we will talk about, you see a very good sort of behind-the-scenes incident with John losing his temper, which we sort of touched upon earlier. And he's singing the harmonies with, it's Phil Spector, isn't it? I believe he's actually there standing at the microphone with.
Yep.
And he gets the right ump with his sound engineer.
We're going to sing the harmonies to Oh Yoko. Come on.
And Yoko's sitting there next to the sound engineer, saying it's that verse there. It's the same as the one before. It can't be that difficult. Does this go into the scene at the beach as well?
Yeah, that's like the end. It's not while John
song.
Oh Yoko's playing. That's the outro, basically. Yeah. We'll talk about that in a sec.
Yeah, but Oh Yoko again, another little love ballad to his wife. When you look at how it was created, there's a lot more to it than a man at guitar or a man at piano singing a song. Overdubs and harmonies. Very simple song. It's actually quite complex in its construction when you look at it.
I mean, he busts out the harmonica as well for the first time in years.
Yeah.
And he plays it. It ends with this very Dylan-esque harmonica.
Yeah.
The sort of slightly ropey harmonica playing, which I loved. It's so bouncy and, it's just irresistibly catchy for me. And, and then there's lots of shots of Yoko, again, looking quite attractive and very sexual, like I said,
I think people's classic impression of Yoko Ono is 1969 in the long white dress with the hair literally straight down, almost covering her face, not saying a word. Yeah. And that's how people perceive Yoko Ono. I think if they were to watch this, I think they'll actually see why Lennon fell for her. I think it becomes quite obvious in this film. Yeah.
Well, remember as well, a lot of that footage in 68, 69, they're on heroin as well.
That's true. So they're not too well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the famous, what they call the Two Junkies interview, the one in January 69 where he has to go off and be sick.
Yes.
The famous interview. I mean, they look terrible.
Yeah.
He looks terrible as well, because they're in the grip of heroin addiction.
Yeah.
So, as I say, I think if I had to make a guess, I'd say there were always drugs around, but probably most of the time weed or whatever. They were doing methadone at this time to actually get off heroin, but they just seem a little bit brighter, and he seems fairly coherent most of the time, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I like the little flashback in the lyrics to this, to A Day in the Life, where he says, "My love will turn you on."
Oh, my love will turn you on. And then it was, I'd like you to turn you on.
I'd love to turn you on, yeah.
Oh, great stuff. All right, and then there's the final bit.
Yeah.
As you said, on the beach. Go on, you go first.
Well, this one is obviously... I love it. I love... They've conceived this idea to finish the film by writing the credits in the sand. And it becomes this amazing... There's sort of this orchestral background to it that sounds like something like, say, From Here to Eternity, the famous Burt Lancaster scene where he's kissing Deborah Carr on the beach. They're having a lot of fun because they're running towards each other from opposite ends of the beach and missing each other, deliberately. Yeah. And all the time they're walking off into the distance, they're screaming, "Oh, John, oh, Yoko, oh, John, oh, Yoko." And it goes on for, 2 minutes, possibly. And I was just chuckling away at the end of it, thinking, you two have had a lot of fun making this. It wasn't some intense, arty piece of movie making. You've done it to enjoy yourself, and just listening to it, you can almost hear them laughing, singing "Oh, John, oh, Yoko" at the end. And you just know that, they've spent 12 months just having a giggle doing it.
Yeah, I mean, what saved it for me, I think the bit where they're shouting each other's names, I think if you had to listen to that for too long, and there is a track they did on one of their concept albums in the late 60s, which is probably that for about 10 minutes, which probably would drive people mad. But what saves it for me, like you said, is the humour. The fact that when they're going up to each other on the beach, they miss each other, exactly as you just said. And also the shouting each other's names. Doesn't it, at the end, it becomes, Yoko.
Exactly, he's just going up and down, and you can hear the giggle in her voice as well, and his. It's great stuff, yeah.
Then you realise that they're sending it up. They're sending themselves up at the same time. They said we're willing to be the world's clowns. That's what saves it, because if they were taking it too seriously, then you would think, they're indulging themselves. But they're taking the mick out of us.
It doesn't become, mentioned him earlier, but it doesn't become this sort of Andy Warhol art piece. Just something a bit more personal, I think.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, well, the original plan obviously was to tackle both films, but we've done 1 hour 40.
Wow.
No, it's been fantastic. So what we'll do is I'll obviously put this out as an episode. And then when we can make it happen, we'll tackle the 1988 film. There you have it. Surprise. No goodbye there. What happened was we both recorded it, and the recording we ended up using cut off. We did a sort of unofficial goodbye later on, but let's call that part 1 of 2 anyway, because we're going to get together in the future and do the other Imagine film. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that. Scott and I had a good rapport. Quite mind-blowing, really, because I was listening to him on Rainbow Valley. This has happened a lot this year. Hearing someone for a long time in your earphones as you're going about your day. In my case, usually travelling between teaching assignments, and then suddenly you're there doing it. But we're going to be working together in the future, as I've said, on my podcast and indeed on his, as you heard earlier. I'll look forward to that. So I think there's going to be one more episode before the end of the year. It will probably be Revolution 9, if I can find time, as I said. If not, I'll come up with something, but I hope it is that one, because I'm looking forward to that. So better now than later. Yeah, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for listening, as ever. I never take it for granted. The numbers are steadily rising and getting some lovely messages, and it's all very heartwarming. Makes it all worth it. So I'll see you again soon. Take care and all the best. Goodbye.